They were found together, but one of them never had a choice. It was a cold start to the new year in Burlington Township, New Jersey. Most families were returning to routine, quiet dinners, early bedtimes, the last flickers of holiday lights still glowing in a few windows. But inside a single apartment on Salem Road, something had already ended. At first, there was silence. Then, an argument, loud enough for neighbors to stop what they were doing. Moments later, it was quiet again, uncomfortably quiet, and that silence would stretch long enough for someone to worry, long enough for a phone call to be made, long enough for two officers to arrive with no idea what they were about to walk into. When they stepped inside, what they saw would stay with them forever. The bodies of a young woman and a man, lifeless, unmoving. To some, it looked clear. He had a gun. She had been beaten. There were no signs of forced entry. A tragic domestic case, one the department would classify quickly. Murder-suicide. Close the file. Move on. But what if that conclusion was too easy? What if the truth wasn't that clean? What if something else happened in that room? Something far more complicated than a single moment of rage. She was a mother, a mentor, a light in the lives of those who knew her. He was someone they thought they understood. Yet on January 2nd, 2020, both were gone. And only one of them had the power to speak for what truly happened. One woman dead, one man holding the answer. But did anyone really know what was going on behind their closed doors? And here on Dark Trail Files, we don't stop at the headlines. We dig deeper into the shadows, the silences, and the stories that demand to be heard. If you want the truth, not just the version written in ink, subscribe now. Because what you're about to uncover might change everything. Before the headlines, before the police cars, before anyone thought to ask what happened in that apartment, there was a woman named Tiana Drummond. And she was so much more than the final moments that came to define her name in the news. Tiana was 28 years old. She was a mother, first and always. Her world revolved around her son, and everyone who knew her would say the same thing. If she wasn't working, she was mothering, loving, showing up, giving more than she had. She had this light to her, the kind that didn't just shine quietly, it reached people. Kids in her neighborhood knew her from the sidelines of youth football games. She wasn't just a supportive parent. She was a figure in that small community. Always cheering, always organizing. Loud in the best way. The kind of energy that draws people in without even trying. To her friends, she was the one you called when you needed grounding. To her family, she was the joy in the room. To her son, she was the whole world. And to Christopher Corey, her boyfriend, she was his partner. Or at least, that's what it looked like from the outside. Tiana had dreams. She wanted to do more, be more. Build something for herself and her child. She wasn't one to broadcast her pain. If something was wrong, she kept it close. She handled things quietly, privately. But on the day she died, there were pieces. Tiny moments. Shards of information that only matter after something goes terribly wrong. January 2nd, 2020. It began like any other day. A Thursday. It was cold, temperatures hovering in the low 30s, and Tiana had spoken to at least one friend on the phone that morning. She sounded normal. Maybe a little tired. Maybe distracted. Nothing unusual. But later that afternoon, she was seen entering her apartment building with Christopher. There was no sign of struggle. No shouting. No fear. Just two people going home. What happened inside, in those final hours of daylight, no one outside that apartment can say for certain. There were no public posts. No cries for help. No neighbors heard anything until they did. Just after 10 p.m., a neighbor reported hearing a loud argument from Tiana's unit. Raised voices. Something slamming. Then nothing. That silence stretched. By morning, she hadn't answered any calls or messages. Her car was still parked outside. No one had seen her. A wellness check was requested. Police would arrive shortly after. And when they forced entry, the truth began to unspool. Tiana's body was found inside the apartment. She had suffered blunt force trauma. Christopher Corey was also there, dead from a single gunshot wound. A weapon lay nearby. From that moment on, she would only be referred to as the victim. But she was so much more than that. She had been alive just hours before, laughing, talking, texting. A mother. A woman with plans. A woman with a future. And just like that, gone. Whatever Tiana experienced in her final moments, she didn't deserve it. She didn't choose it. And she didn't have a chance to tell the world what really happened. It was late. Most of the residents at Willow Point Apartments had already turned in for the night. The holiday season had just ended, and January 2nd felt like the official end of celebration. A return to routine. Quiet. Stillness. But somewhere within Unit 2210, that stillness was broken. It's just after 10:30 p.m. The call to police would come at 10:42. A neighbor, concerned, unsure, reported hearing what sounded like a serious argument. No screams, but raised voices, male and female, some loud thuds, and then a stretch of silence that didn't sit right. 2 officers from the Burlington Township Police Department were dispatched to the address on Salem Road. They arrived within minutes. The building stood quiet. No lights flickering inside the unit. No answer at the door. The officers knocked, waited, knocked again. Still no answer. They made the decision to enter. Inside, there were no signs of forced entry. No signs of a struggle beyond the walls. The apartment was orderly. Everything in place. Almost untouched. Until they stepped further in. Tiana Drummond's body was found first. She was already gone. The medical examiner would later confirm the cause of death, blunt force trauma. It was brutal. The kind of injuries that don't happen by accident. Not a fall. Not self-inflicted. Closed by Christopher Corey. He was on the ground, a firearm near his hand. A single gunshot wound. He was dead, too. The officers paused the scene. Called it in. Secured the perimeter. A double fatality. 1 woman, 1 man. No one else inside. No witnesses. The call-out would escalate fast. Detectives, forensic technicians, medical personnel. The apartment became a sealed box of questions. They processed it carefully. Photographs. Blood spatter analysis. Trajectory lines. Positions of the bodies. Autopsy timelines. The kind of work no one ever wants to become routine, but in cases like these, it has to be. What they began piecing together was this. Tiana had sustained multiple blows to the head and upper body. Not a single strike. Multiple. There were signs that she had been attacked with force. No defensive wounds were publicly confirmed, but the conclusion was clear. Christopher, meanwhile, had a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head. The weapon matched the wound. The gun was registered. There were no signs of a struggle around his body. The assumption from the scene was swift. He had killed her, then turned the gun on himself. But for the people who knew Tiana, for her family, for her friends, there were too many gaps. Too many things that didn't feel like her. Too many questions left in the silence. Was this something that had been building? Or was it a single moment? Something explosive? Something nobody saw coming? Why had no one been warned? No cries for help. No text that raised red flags. No visible bruises in the days before. No reports to police. At least, none that had been made public. And then there was the phone. Tiana's phone had gone dark. Her last known activity was sometime before 10 p.m. That meant that whatever happened inside that apartment likely took place within a 30-minute window. A small crack in time. A window no one could see through until it was too late. The following morning, news hadn't yet reached the public. But inside the Burlington Township Police Department, the gears of a grim process were already turning. The apartment was now a sealed crime scene. Officers remained on rotation outside Unit 2210 at Willow Point as forensic investigators combed through the rooms. They documented every inch, down to the smallest items left untouched on the counter. 2 mugs, 1 half full. A phone charger unplugged. A throw pillow on the floor. Tiana Drummond's body was transported to the Burlington County Medical Examiner's office. The autopsy, conducted within 48 hours, confirmed what the scene had already suggested. Homicide by blunt force trauma. There were multiple injuries to her face and head. The examiner noted evidence of repeated impact, ruling out any suggestion that this was an accident or a fall. The fatal injuries were deliberate, sustained. Christopher Corey's body was examined next. The report confirmed a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head. The bullet matched the firearm found beside his body. There were no defensive wounds. No evidence he had been attacked. The gun was legally owned. There was no sign of a struggle on his end. By January 6th, just 4 days after the bodies were found, the Burlington County Prosecutor's Office released a public statement. It was short, direct, final. The case was ruled a murder-suicide. Tiana Drummond had been killed by Christopher Corey, who then took his own life. To law enforcement, the facts were all there. A secure apartment, no forced entry. A single weapon, found at the scene. No other individuals present. A clear cause of death for both. No evidence of anyone else entering or leaving during the estimated time of death. Case closed. But outside the station walls, in homes and community centers, that conclusion didn't bring peace. It brought questions, doubts, and silence. Tiana's family was devastated. Her friends, especially those from the youth football team she helped support, were in shock. The parents, the children, none of them saw this coming. None of them understood how it had come to this. There had never been a police report filed between Tiana and Christopher. No restraining orders. No prior calls of domestic violence that had reached authorities. At least, not on record. But privately, among those who knew her, there were quiet conversations. Moments she'd brushed off. Comments he had made. Times she seemed distant, distracted. A little more reserved. Was there something going on behind the scenes? Something she hadn't shared? Or was this a single moment, a snap decision made in the dark? No one could say for sure. Not anymore. Her phone was locked. No final message was ever recovered. No note left behind by Christopher. Only silence. The apartment was eventually cleared. Personal belongings returned to the family. But the questions, they never left. Why her? Why then? And how long had it been building? For some, the case was solved. But for those who loved Tiana, justice didn't feel like a file closed. It felt like something unanswered. The official report was clear. Homicide. Suicide. Case closed. But in the aftermath, once the headlines faded, once the apartment door was locked for the last time, there were still whispers. Still questions. Still the gnawing sense that the truth might be more complicated than anyone was willing to admit. Because when a woman is killed by someone she was supposed to trust, someone she was living with, people want to understand how it could happen. And more importantly, why? The dominant theory, the one echoed in press releases and case files, is the most straightforward. Murder-suicide. Christopher Corey, for reasons unknown, attacked and killed Tiana Drummond inside their shared apartment. Then, facing the aftermath of what he had done, or possibly having planned it all along, he turned the gun on himself. This theory is backed by clear, undeniable physical evidence. The blunt force injuries on Tiana's body. The single gunshot wound to Christopher's head. The firearm found beside him. No sign of forced entry. No evidence that anyone else was inside. It paints a picture that's devastating, but simple. And that simplicity is what some people struggled to accept. Because to those who knew Tiana, Christopher didn't fit the image of someone who would snap. And to those who knew Christopher, Tiana didn't fit the image of someone living in fear. So the questions began. Was there a third person? No forced entry, but what if someone was let in? Could a third party have staged the scene? Was there someone else involved? Someone who had a motive, a reason, an escape plan? Police found no trace of another individual. No DNA. No extra footprints. No surveillance footage showing anyone entering or exiting during the time window. But sometimes, absence of evidence doesn't quiet doubt. It feeds it. Could it have been an accident? Some speculated, quietly, that the violence hadn't been premeditated. Maybe there was an argument. Maybe it escalated. Maybe Tiana was struck once, and the damage was more severe than he expected. And in the aftermath, gripped by panic or remorse, he used the gun on himself. But even that explanation couldn't ease the horror. Because whether it was planned or not, Tiana was dead. And there was no way to ask Christopher what he'd been thinking in those final moments. And then there was the other theory, one that didn't suggest innocence or accident, but rather intent. Was this a premeditated act? Had Christopher Corey decided, days or even weeks earlier, that if things between them ever reached a certain point, he would take control of the ending? Some friends of Tiana remembered moments. Times she was quieter. Times she seemed less present. Moments that, in hindsight, felt loaded. Had he been watching her more closely? Was he jealous? Controlling? Had something triggered him? Some wondered if there had been psychological struggles behind the scenes, something invisible to the outside world. Depression? Rage? Possessiveness? There were no confirmed diagnoses. No suicide note. No explanation from Christopher. But one person, in an online forum dedicated to local news cases, put it like this. We don't really know what happened in that room, but I know she didn't deserve to die, and I don't believe it came out of nowhere. For every theory that tried to make sense of the crime, one truth remained constant. Tiana Drummond could no longer speak for herself, and Christopher Corey had taken the answers with him. So what were we left with? A scene, a conclusion, a loss, and the space between what we know and what we fear might still be hidden. Every tragedy has a point of no return. A moment, a breath, a sentence, a silence that divides before from after. In the case of Tiana Drummond and Christopher Corey, no one ever found that moment. There was no last call to the police, no witness report of threats, no diary entry, no text that warned what was coming. But something must have changed. Something must have cracked, because two people went into that apartment and only their bodies came out. What was the breaking point? Some said it was a slow unraveling, not a sudden explosion. There were rumors, unconfirmed but persistent, that Tiana had started pulling away. Maybe she was growing tired of the relationship. Maybe she wanted out. Friends would later mention conversations where Tiana seemed drained, distant. Not fearful, but tired, worn down. Had there been arguments behind closed doors? Had things escalated in recent weeks? One friend, who asked not to be named, said she had once seen Tiana with what looked like swelling around her eye. When asked about it, Tiana waved it off, said she slipped on ice. Maybe she had, or maybe that was the first visible trace of something darker. Christopher wasn't known to the public as violent. He didn't have a long arrest record, but sometimes control doesn't look like violence, at least not at first. Sometimes it's subtle, a change in tone, a hand on a shoulder that lingers too long. The need to know where you are, who you're with, when you're coming home. In private, things can look different than they do in pictures. And Tiana? She wasn't one to complain. She carried herself with grace. If she was struggling, she did it quietly. But eventually, the quiet catches up. Maybe she said something that night. Maybe she stood up for herself. Maybe she said she was done. And maybe Christopher couldn't handle that. We'll never know for sure. What we do know is this. After their deaths, the entire Burlington community shook. The local youth football league held a moment of silence. Parents gathered at practices with tears in their eyes, trying to explain to their children why Miss Tiana wouldn't be on the sidelines anymore. Teammates of her son wore black armbands for the rest of the season. The grief wasn't abstract, it was personal. Neighbors left flowers at the base of the apartment complex stairwell. Handwritten notes. Photos taped to brick. One card simply said, "We are sorry we didn't know. We are sorry we weren't there." The news traveled fast, and then it stopped. The case was ruled closed. But for Tiana's family and friends, there was no closure. They struggled to make sense of the silence that followed. Why hadn't there been more coverage? Why wasn't there a deeper investigation into the relationship dynamics? Why had it all ended in a single press release? For many, the pain wasn't just in what happened. It was in how quickly it seemed forgotten. At her memorial, a close friend stood up and said, "Tiana was full of light, always laughing, always dancing. Now we're in the dark. We're left wondering if we could have seen the signs, if she even knew they were there." The news didn't take long to spread. Burlington Township isn't the kind of place where tragedies go unnoticed. By the time the sun set on January 2nd, 2020, Tiana Drummond's name was already echoing across Facebook timelines, community boards, and the hearts of everyone who had ever crossed her path. People were stunned, not just by what happened, but by who it happened to. Tiana was described by co-workers as radiant, reliable, the kind of person who always asked how you were doing, then waited for the real answer. She had been a healthcare worker. She had cared for people in their darkest moments. But when her own darkness came, no one had seen it. Or maybe, no one had looked hard enough. A candlelight vigil was held 3 nights later, just outside the very apartment complex where her life had ended. Dozens gathered in the cold, holding photos, signs, and each other. Many wept. Others stayed quiet, their silence speaking louder than any words ever could. But through the heartbreak, a new wave of anger began to build. Because Tiana had made reports before. To friends. To family. Even to local authorities. There were texts. Voicemails. Screenshots. But no restraining order had ever been filed. No official charges had ever stuck. And Christopher Corey? He wasn't a stranger to violence. Not in his past relationships. Not in the way he handled conflict. One neighbor, who asked to remain anonymous, later told investigators, "You could feel it. The tension. It was like the air changed every time they walked by. But what could I do? I didn't want to get in the middle of it." But now, with Tiana gone, those whispers became screams. Advocacy groups across New Jersey began sharing her story. She did everything right. She told people. She tried to leave. And she still ended up dead. One post read, "We failed Tiana. The system failed Tiana." Her family, shattered and furious, released a statement that read, "Tiana was light. She was joy. She deserved protection. We will never forgive how blind the world was to her pain." They called for deeper domestic violence protections, stronger enforcement of red flag laws, and more funding for victim outreach. But as the media cycle moved on and new headlines pushed old tragedies into silence, those closest to her feared the same thing, that Tiana Drummond would become just another statistic. One of over 1,500 women killed by a partner in the United States that year. One of the 70% whose stories are only told when it's far too late. Her mother, speaking in front of a crowd 6 months later, didn't hold back. He killed her long before he pulled that trigger. He killed her with control, with threats, with silence. And we let it happen. We like to think we would know, that we'd recognize the signs, that if someone close to us was in danger, we'd see it, we'd step in, we'd save them. But what if we don't? What if the signs were quiet? What if they were hidden in apologies, in nervous laughs, in social media posts that looked fine but weren't? What if the screams were only ever whispered? Tiana Drummond lived among us. She laughed at family barbecues. She posted TikToks with her little brother. She showed up to work every day. And still, she died with no one there to stop it. Her killer, Christopher Corey, was someone she once trusted. Someone she had loved. And in the end, someone who made sure that if he couldn't have her, no one could. Investigators would later confirm that the shooting was deliberate. The wounds, the angle, the number of rounds fired, it all told a story of intent. A final, violent attempt at control. He was arrested. He was charged. But he also survived something Tiana didn't get the chance to do. And in that brutal imbalance lies the echo of every question we still can't answer. How many women are silently enduring the same cycle right now? How many friends and neighbors look the other way because it's not their business? How many warnings are buried in texts no one reads until it's too late? And how many Tianas will there be before something finally changes? The truth is, this isn't just about Christopher Corey. It's about a system that waits until someone is bleeding before it starts paying attention. It's about a world that blames victims for staying instead of asking why they didn't feel safe to leave. And it's about a woman who wanted to live, who tried to live, but was killed anyway. Her name was Tiana Drummond. She was 28 years old, and she should be here. She should be laughing, dancing, raising her son, living a future that she earned. Instead, she became a cautionary tale. And the question we all need to ask now is, how many more will there be before we listen? Tiana Drummond's story cannot be changed. But what we do with it, how we carry it forward, that's up to us. If this case moved you, if you believe her life should be remembered, not forgotten, then help us share her story. Subscribe to this channel, Dark Trail Files, for more in-depth, truth-driven documentaries that give a voice to victims, because their stories deserve to be told. And if you know someone who might be in danger, don't stay silent. Your voice might be the one that saves a life. Thank you for watching. And as always, stay aware, stay safe.